All right. Thanks everybody for coming. This is PSAMC, Offensive PowerShell Interaction with the AMSI, or Anti Malware Scan Interface. We're going to be talking about some offensive use cases for interacting with the AMSI, and I'll introduce a tool I wrote for doing that called PSAMC. And we'll be showing a lot of demos of that as well. So to start off, I'll do a really quick intro of myself, and then we can jump into it. So the bash who am I intro slide is super overrated, and I'm going to be talking a lot about PowerShell today. So I did my intro on PowerShell as well. So my name is Ryan Cobb. I work at the consulting company Protivity with those guys, and I work as a pen tester and consultant. And I go by the handle Cobber, or Cobber_IO on Twitter. And the last thing you need to know is I don't claim to be an expert about any of this stuff. A year and a half ago today, PowerShell to me was a command prompt with fancy blue background. So I'm really new to all this stuff, so if I get anything wrong, feel free to let me know about it afterwards. I won't be offended. So with this presentation, I really have two main goals. The first is to convince you that offensive PowerShell isn't dead yet. And so if you've really been paying attention for the past year or so, a lot of really smart people have been saying that offensive PowerShell is kind of dead due to its improved logging capabilities, and we now have to worry about antivirus detection in memory due to the AMSI, which we'll dive into a lot deeper in the presentation. And those people are absolutely right. I'm sure tools and malware in general will be moving in the direction of some other languages that have less protections than PowerShell does. But I also don't think we're completely out of the water just yet, and I'm going to try to convince you of that as well. And my second goal is to convince you that your AMSI next-gen stream scanning antivirus is not a silver bullet, and I might be preaching to the choir a little bit, particularly at this conference with that point, but I think it's a really important point for us to make as an industry, so I'm going to go ahead and try to make it anyway. And to help me do that, I'm going to introduce a tool I wrote called PSAMC, which is a tool for auditing and defeating AMSI signatures. And so let's talk about that first point. Is offensive PowerShell dead yet? If you've ever seen the movie Monty Python, I feel like this is kind of where we're at with offensive PowerShell right now, where a lot of people just kind of want to kill it off and call it dead, when maybe we're not quite there yet. But to help understand why a lot of really smart people are saying that it is dead, let's dive into some of the protections that defenders have against PowerShell threats. The first one would be the Anti Malware Scan Interface, which we'll be diving into deeper throughout the presentation, which allows antivirus to scan, detect, and block malicious scripts in memory, such as PowerShell and some other languages as well. And in addition, PowerShell has a ton of really cool built-in logging capabilities, the most important of which probably being script block logging, which logs script blocks as they are executed, which has the added benefit of unraveling a lot of obfuscation attempts, such as base64 encoding. Secondly, there is module logging, which can be extremely verbose and hard to piece together, but is kind of useful in like a post-breach scenario where you want a lot of data. And lastly, there is transcription logging, which can also capture the output of scripts as well. And lastly, defenders can use command line logging to see if PowerShell is getting started with suspicious flags such as encoded command or execution policy bypass. And Lee Holmes did a talk earlier today going into a lot more detail about some of these techniques for defender. Hopefully you caught that. If not, you should definitely go back and give it a watch.
Are any of those versions specific?
Sorry, what was that?
Are any of those versions specific?
Yeah, we'll get into that right now. So to make the argument of why I am saying offensive PowerShell is not dead yet, there are some limitations on those protections. In particular, PowerShell version 2, if you're able to launch it, there's no built-in logging capabilities or AMSI because those features were introduced in later versions of PowerShell. And the problem there is that PowerShell version 2 is installed by default all the way down to Windows 7, except now for Windows 10 and Server 2016. But most organizations haven't moved to Windows 10 quite yet, and if they have, maybe they haven't enabled those script block logs or not collecting and monitoring them for threats. And lastly, most antiviruses have not actually implemented support for the AMSI yet, though luckily the default Windows Defender installation does implement support. So at this point you might be thinking, sure, if an organization is just being totally ignorant to PowerShell threats, then they're just kind of asking for it at this point, right? So what about an organization that's doing everything right? They've moved their entire organization to Windows 10 somehow. They've enabled script block logging across the enterprise. They're collecting those script block logs, and they're monitoring them for threats. They bought a fancy endpoint protection agent with AMSI support. This organization has to be safe, right? Well, they're definitely miles ahead of most organizations and are somewhat safe, but there are AMSI bypasses. There's a script block logging bypass. As well, attackers can use obfuscation to get around some of the signatures that defenders are looking for, either with AMSI or looking for in their logs. An important point here, the script block logging bypass, actually I just kind of looked at it a few days ago, might have been fixed in the most recent Windows update. And additionally, that AMSI bypass, that has to be some super new CVE, right? And Microsoft is hard at work on a fix. Or is it? So if you didn't know already, PowerShell is open source and on GitHub, which means you can run across some interesting threads, such as this one. So someone actually submitted Macgraver's AMSI bypass as a GitHub issue, and it was closed. He was hit with the "this is not a security boundary" response, and closed with "resolution won't fix." So will this be fixed? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. But let's dive into how the AMSI is supposed to work when it's not bypassed. So this is a nice diagram provided to us by Microsoft. You can see some applications like PowerShell making calls to Win32 API functions that eventually make calls to an anti-malware provider interface. So this is my super dumbed down version of the same diagram. So you can see we have applications there on the left, submitting strings to the AMSI DLL, calling functions exported from that DLL. And you can see PowerShell actually sends those, what it logs to script block logs through that AMSI. And then the AMSI makes calls to the anti-malware provider, which actually scans and detects malicious content in those strings. An important point here is that this is actually anti-malware provider agnostic, meaning that theoretically any antivirus can actually register as the anti-malware provider and start providing signatures. So any AV can provide signatures, and any application can submit strings to be scanned by the AMSI and to see if it contains malicious content. Well, at its core, that is what PSAMC is, an application that submits strings to the AMSI to check for malicious content. At this point, you might be thinking, what? I thought this was supposed to be an offensive tool. Why are we submitting strings directly to the AMSI? Well, yes. So PSAMC uses the AMSI interface itself to enumerate AMSI signatures, and yes, will generate antivirus alerts. This sounds kind of absurd at first, but try to stay in here with me for a second. So PSAMC, like I said before, is a tool for auditing and defeating AMSI signatures. So we'll start off talking about that auditing portion. So I made a strategic decision when writing PSAMC that I was only going to support PowerShell version 5 and up. And the main reason for that is that the AMSI is only included in PowerShell version 5 and on Windows 10, so there's no real reason to maintain that backwards compatibility. And I don't know if everyone here knows this or not, but PowerShell version 3 and up actually does stuff besides just logging. And I joke around, but as attackers, we often are so fixated with trying to be backwards compatible to PowerShell version 2 that we don't get to use a lot of these features. But in writing PSAMC, I did get to take advantage of those, and I took full advantage. So the most basic functionality in PSAMC is this PSAMC scanner class, which is just a class for conducting AMSI scans. And it does this by calling those functions exported from the AMSI DLL using psreflect, which is written by Macgraver. If you haven't seen psreflect or heard of it, definitely recommend checking it out. It's really cool. It allows us to create an in-memory module of functions exported from that AMSI DLL in memory without creating any files. So the typical technique for calling functions exported from a DLL would be the add type technique, but that can create like temporary compilation files. And if we're trying to enumerate in-memory signatures, then we don't want our typical like file scanning antivirus to get in our way and screw up our results. So this is best shown with a little demo. So the first thing we're going to do is just set the execution policy to bypass so we can import the PSAMC module. And then we're going to create a little variable called the Mimikatz URL, which just points to an invoke Mimikatz script. And then we're going to create the scanner using a default constructor with no parameters. And you can see here, after we print it to the screen, that this maintains a bunch of state, which is a big benefit of being a class, as it gets to maintain this state in between scans. And we'll get to dive into a couple of these properties in more detail throughout the presentation. And then we're going to use this get PSAMC scan result function that will just scan the word test. And what this does is you can see it returns false, indicating that the anti-malware provider did not detect that string as malicious. Now, this function can take strings, script blocks, file paths, or URIs. So this time what we'll do is just scan that Mimikatz URL. It's just going to download that and then scan it. And just as we would hope, it returns true, indicating that the anti-malware provider detected that as malicious. And now, in addition to being a class, there's also PowerShell functions that wrap all the same functionality and are a bit easier to use in my opinion. And so what we did there was just do the same thing with the functions, and you can see we get the same results. So now if we take a look at the scanner after a couple of scans, we can see that it maintains that state. You can see it recognizes that it has generated one alert, and you'll see that Windows Defender pop up in just a second, and also maintains a scan cache. If we take a look in the cache, you'll see it just remembers some of those scan results that it's already run. And there's that alert I warned you about. And this PSAMC scanner class, there's really no reason that this can't be used by defenders as well. So I'm using it for offensive purposes in PSAMC, but really it's just a convenient way to call the AMSI functions within PowerShell. So that's doing some really basic AMSI scans, but PSAMC also provides a way to find hidden AMSI signatures within a script. And this is where PSAMC starts to become really useful. We can do things like find all the malicious strings within a script that the anti-malware provider detects as malicious with this find AMSI signatures function. So how does it do this? It uses the abstract syntax tree. So again, PowerShell version 3 and up does stuff. It gives us that abstract syntax tree, which is used in like various source code languages for like representing and parsing source code. But for us, it's just a really useful way to break down a script into logical chunks, and we can scan each of those chunks using that PSAMC scanner class. And we just have to find the minimally sized portions of that script that are flagged by AMSI as malicious, and will give us our resulting signatures. So we'll walk through an example of this. We'll show a little example script at the top corner. The slide's about to get really busy, just as a warning. And so this is just a really basic script. So let's take a look at what a tree would look like for this script. And like all trees, our root starts at the top and our branches extend downwards, because that makes sense for some reason. So that's going to be our root AST node. And you can see it contains the text of the entire script. And it has one child that also contains all the text. And then that one's going to contain two children, that function definition, and then the portion that calls the function definition. And this continues all the way down the script. You get the idea. And this is just a really useful and powerful way to represent a script, and is given for us for free by PowerShell. So anyone who's written a decent amount of PowerShell knows write host is evil. It's the worst, and it ruins everything. So what we're going to do is pretend that we have an anti-malware provider that detects that string highlighted up there, write host num, as malicious. Now when we do this search for signatures, we don't know that that is the signature yet, so I'm kind of cheating by telling you that it will be. And then we're just going to scan each node in this tree with that PSAMC scanner class. So when we scan that first one and it comes back as detected, because it contains that signature. And we'll continue this all the way down the tree until we get to this one when we scan, and we'll see that it is not detected as malicious. So it's not contained in this tree. And then when we scan this one, we'll see that the signature is contained there. We'll continue all the way down this tree, and now we have a list of all the ASTs within this script that are detected as malicious by the anti-malware provider. And all we have to do is find the minimally sized chunks in this tree that are detected, and it will give us all of our signatures. Basically all of the leaves of this tree formed that are detected. So luckily you don't have to know how any of that works to run the function. You just call this find AMSI signatures function, and we're just going to scan that Mimikatz script and see how many signatures we get back. You can see it found 7 unique signatures within the invoke Mimikatz function. So let's take a look at what those signatures actually are. So this first one, you can see is just a giant block of base64 encoded text. If you've ever taken a look at what the invoke Mimikatz function actually does, it's basically a giant invoke reflective PE injection of the base64 encoded bytes of the Mimikatz binary. And there's a 32-bit block of bytes and a 64-bit block of bytes. So that's what these first 2 signatures are. And if you think about it, to break these signatures, we don't really have to use obfuscation. We could just recompile the Mimikatz binary and paste in the encoded bytes. But you block known bad, so these signatures seem to make sense. This next signature is a Win32 API function call that creates a remote thread injected into a process. Another signature that seems to make sense. This next signature is just a bit lazier. It's just an add member call with the variable name happens to be write process memory, because no legitimate function could ever use that variable name, right? And this next signature is very similar to that last one, but the variable name is virtual protect. So just remember, when you're creating your PowerShell objects, don't name any of your properties virtual protect. Mimikatz uses that name, so you can't. Next one is just the full param block of the Mimikatz function, and the last one is the full comment block of the invoke Mimikatz function. Cool. So we've talked about the auditing portion. Let's talk about the defeating portion. And the way we're going to defeat signatures within PSAMC is using obfuscation. And you're going to have a chance to hear a lot about PowerShell obfuscation here at Derbycon this year. Hopefully you caught Daniel's Invoke Cradlecrafter talk just a second ago, where he went into a lot more detail about some of these techniques. And before we go into how PSAMC actually, so PSAMC uses another one of Daniel's tools called Invoke obfuscation. And before we go into how it actually implements that, let's look at an example of obfuscation that defeats an AMSI signature. So we're going to use one of those signatures we found just a second ago. It's going to be that add member virtual protect signature. And we'll just do a quick scan on there to verify that it's detected as malicious, and it is. And then what we're going to do here is just replace that virtual protect variable with an obfuscated version, just wrapped in curly braces, which is an example of something that invoke obfuscation might do to obfuscate a variable. And you can see we've only added 2 characters to that signature. Now if we scan it, we can see it's no longer detected as malicious, indicating that we have defeated that signature using obfuscation. So we'll quickly scan the invoke Mimikatz function again to verify that it is detected as malicious. And now, we're not sold on this whole AMSI thing. We don't think it really works. So we're just going to try to download and run it anyway and see what happens. You can see it doesn't work. We get no output and a little defender pop-up. So now we're going to use PSAMC's get minimally obfuscated function that will find all of those signatures that we talked about before and defeat them using obfuscation, and then try to run it. You can see it executes just fine. And then this next call right here is just showing you that you can actually feed in the signatures that we found earlier directly to the function, and it won't have to find them again. Just a little bit quicker. The problem becomes when defenders get smart to all of this obfuscation nonsense and start, instead of trying to match on just static AMSI signatures, actually try to detect obfuscation itself. And the whole idea here is that heavy obfuscation is very obvious to a human. When they look at it, they can tell right away that it is obfuscated. So taking a look at an example of that script that we saw earlier, if we run it through Invoke Obfuscation's token all1 command, this is an example of some output we might get. So if you as a human took a look at that, you would instantly recognize it as obfuscated. You could tell that something just doesn't look right there. So with that in mind, so Lee Holmes actually wrote a blog a while back about detecting obfuscation using character frequency analysis. And Lee and Daniel eventually incorporated that into a much larger set of rules and released it as Revo obfuscation. And I believe they're giving a presentation on that tomorrow. Make sure you go ahead and catch that. They're going to go into a lot more detail about detecting obfuscation. But do we really need to use all that obfuscation if our only goal is to bypass those AMSI signatures? We saw earlier we defeated 1 of 7 signatures within Invoke Mimikatz just by adding 2 characters. So how do we automate this process? As you saw before, there's the get minimally obfuscated function within PSAMC that will basically combine that find AMSI signatures function and make an informed decision about where to obfuscate in the script. Basically, we just iterate over the signatures found in the script and obfuscate them just a little bit until they are no longer detected as malicious. So an example of this, we just import the invoke and revoke obfuscation modules. We'll once again verify that this script is detected as malicious, and it is. And now what we're going to do is just transform it into a script block and feed that through invoke obfuscation, which will get a fully obfuscated, non-minimized obfuscated result. And then we will scan that to see if we've defeated the AMSI signatures. And you see that we have. But when we feed it through revoke obfuscation, you can see it is detected as obfuscated. So now instead of using a full invoke obfuscation, we'll use PSAMC's get minimally obfuscated function, which will only obfuscate those signatures that it finds. And it does use invoke obfuscation, but only targets it at those signatures. And now we run a scan on the obfuscated result and see that it is no longer detected as malicious. And additionally, when we run it through revoke obfuscation, we'll see it is not detected as obfuscated. Now, revoke obfuscation is built on a machine learning model. So if we feed in some of this minimized obfuscation output, it may actually get better and start detecting some of this stuff. But the reason I show revoke obfuscation here is it's really kind of the best obfuscation detection out there right now. So it really highlights the benefits for an attacker of minimizing their obfuscation. And PSAMC contains another kind of convenience function that can do all of the stuff we've talked about so far in a single function, and we'll take parameters as just little switch parameters. And this is really useful in instances like PS remoting, which we'll show an example of in a second. And the nice thing about this is everything comes out as a PS custom object with labeled properties. But we probably want to do this on more than one script at a time. We probably have a collection of malicious PowerShell scripts that we use all the time. And PSAMC can take input from the pipeline to handle this, but we don't want to just drop all our scripts to disk and then feed those through PSAMC, because our traditional file scanning antivirus will pick up on that really easily. So with that in mind, I implemented a client-server architecture into PSAMC. And so the server component would run on kind of like an attacker-controlled box, and all it does is opens up a port, and then we run the start PSAMC client function on a target machine with AMSI support. and it will connect back to our server asking for all the scripts that it wants to operate on. It will send those back to the client, and then the client will do all the stuff we've talked about: scanning, finding signatures, obfuscating, and then the results will be sent back to the server, and the output will come on the server side. And I don't know about you, but I prefer to work from a Linux box a lot of the times. So if you're anything like me, you're in luck because the server-side functionality all works on a Linux machine. So what we're going to do is just start up PowerShell and import the module. And I'm a big fan of Empire, and Empire modules happen to contain a lot of the PowerShell scripts that I like to run. So what we're going to do is feed in all of the Empire modules into that start PSAMC server function and to operate on those. And it opens up a port for us and waits for a request. And another tool I'm a big fan of is CrackMapExec, which is really good at executing code on a remote system. And you can see right here what we're going to run is just a little PowerShell download cradle that will download that client-side code. And a handy little thing about the start PSAMC server function is it will actually serve the client-side code in addition to the PSAMC requests, so we don't have to stand up an additional server. So you can see it connects back, and if we don't add any additional switches, it will just scan all of the scripts and tell us if they're detected or not. And you can see most of the modules within Empire are not detected as malicious, but a handful, like 8 or 9 of them, are detected. But we want to do more than this, right? We don't just want to scan, we want to find those signatures. So to do that, we're going to start it up the exact same way as before. We're just going to add, on the client side, a little find AMSI signature switch. And then we print the results to the screen. And now we have all of the AMSI signatures contained in all of the modules of Empire. And you can see on the screen there that a lot of these signatures are actually shared between scripts. So what we want to do is see all of the unique signatures in these modules and see how many of those there are. We'll do that with this little PowerShell one-liner. And you can see that there is only 7 unique signatures contained in all of the Empire modules, and it just so happens that Invoke Mimikatz contains all of them. So you probably guessed it at this point. We're just going to now get the minimally obfuscated versions of all of the scripts by adding that little switch. And now what we're going to get is the minimally obfuscated version of every single Empire module. And I don't know if people know this yet or not, but Empire now has obfuscation built in. So all we have to do with this little snippet right here is we're just going to write all of these obfuscated scripts under the obfuscated module source folder within Empire, and we can immediately start using all of these. So to do that, we're just going to start up Empire, where I already have a listener set up and an agent connected back. And all we're going to do is set a global obfuscate switch to true, and we'll be able to start using those. And Empire actually has Invoke obfuscation built in as well, so it can obfuscate on the fly for us, but because we already specified all of those minimized obfuscation files, it's just going to pull those and use those instead. And because we obfuscated through all of those AMSI signatures, this is going to execute just fine. Now at this point, you might be thinking, all right, all of this looks really cool, but it's generating a lot of antivirus alerts. Yeah, you're kind of right. It's kind of a bummer, but it's also kind of the whole point of the framework. So with that being said, PSAMC is best used in a test environment to quickly create payloads you know will not be detected by a particular anti-malware provider. With that being said, I can think of a few instances where it might be okay to just go ahead and YOLO it and do it in production. For instance, like if we know the blue team is not collecting their AMSI alerts, then we don't care about them, we just want things to run. Secondly, like maybe if it's a really long-term engagement, you know that you're not going to be able to get a copy of the anti-malware provider to test on. Maybe the one-time noise is going to be worth that guaranteed stealth over the long term. But with that being said, it is best to use in a test environment. Don't blame me for getting detected. So we can't really prevent the alerts from being generated, but we can limit them and control them really tightly. So to limit alerts, PSAMC uses a scan result cache so that it will remember all of its scan results. We saw an example of that right at the beginning of the presentation. So that if it sees a signature that it already knows has been detected, it won't rescan it and generate a new alert. It'll just tell you that it is detected. Secondly, it maintains an obfuscation cache. So when it finds a successful obfuscation attempt for a given signature, it will just reuse that obfuscation attempt instead of re-alerting trying to find it again. It also gives you a lot of really fine-grained control over the alerts that you're generating. So you can pass an alert limit to a lot of the functions within PSAMC, and it will never exceed that amount of alerts that you set on it. And this can cause things to sometimes not finish if it doesn't finish before it generates that amount of alerts. And additionally, you can give a delay parameter, which just like it sounds is just amount of time in seconds that you want to delay in between each alert that you generate. And with these two options, we can do things like, say, try to find all the AMSI signatures in this script, but don't generate more than 5 alerts and wait like 2 hours in between each alert. And that would take a really long time and might not actually finish, but gives us really fine-grained control of the alerts that we're generating. It also gives us the ability to spread alerts across hosts. And you have to be careful with this one. You have to decide if it would be better to generate 10 alerts on one host or 1 alert on 10 hosts. And that's going to be highly dependent on the environment that you're in. So how this works, just like the last sketch, very similar to that sketch, but this time we're going to use 2 PSAMC clients, both with an alert limit set. So the server is going to open up a port again. The client's going to connect back, asking for the scripts that it wants to operate on. And then at any point, the second client can connect back and also ask for the scripts. The server will then send the scripts to the client. The client will operate on them, scan, find signatures, obfuscate, until it hits that alert limit that you specified, and then we'll send back the incomplete but partial results from your request, and then the server will inform the second client of the progress of the first client, and it can continue that scan or signature finding or obfuscation, and then once it completes, send back the complete results to the server, and again, the output comes on the server side. So, with all that being said, I can think of some instances where maybe we don't actually need to scan, where we know the signatures that we want to obfuscate around. So if we know the signatures, we don't need to scan and we don't need to generate alerts. So most of the time, we're not going to know the signatures without the help of PSAMC, but I can think of some instances where we might have a set of signatures that are known bad that we want to obfuscate, and we only want to obfuscate those signatures. So the PSAMC scanner class gives us the ability to provide custom known signatures, and get minimally obfuscated can take those, and again, if we don't need to scan, we don't need to alert. So an example, really quick example of how this would actually work. We just define an example script that does a simple download cradle, and then invokes some evil thing, and we give it a set of signatures right there that we want to obfuscate. We feed those signatures to the scanner, and then feed them to the minimally obfuscated function as well. And you can see we get a obfuscated script that is only obfuscated on the signatures that we asked it to. And so this takes PSAMC out of the context of AMSI altogether and just allows us to obfuscate around any arbitrary set of signatures. So that's about all of the demo that I have for PSAMC. And I really think PSAMC is only going to become more relevant over time. In particular, fall is coming. So supposedly in the Windows 10 Fall Creators Update is going to supposedly integrate a lot of the ATP functionality within Windows Defender. And it will be interesting to see how that affects Defender and if it at all affects the Defender AMSI signatures. Additionally, it will be interesting to see if it does any sort of obfuscation detection. But beyond that specific looming update, the AMSI is evolving. So multiple times throughout my research and throughout developing PSAMC, I would go back to the documentation to see that something had changed or something had been added. So this thing is a moving target for sure. And even outside of PowerShell, this will become more relevant. So there's a lot more to do within PSAMC. Specifically, I'd love to implement support for more languages like JScript and VBScript that already take advantage of the AMSI interface. So we can already scan any arbitrary string, but we need to implement signature finding and obfuscation for those languages. And additionally, there's an entirely second side of the AMSI, right? So PSAMC lives on that left side of the screen, but then there's this whole right side interface that there is definitely more room for research. An example of something that popped up in the documentation of AMSI, literally just like a week or two ago, I noticed it popped up in the documentation. If you can read that up there, I don't know if you can, but essentially what it sounds like is there may be a way for administrators to specify specific scripts to be blocked by the AMSI using something like group policy, which to me sounds a little sketchy. So we'll see how that continues to evolve. So that being said, very open to contributions to the project for any of those functionalities or anything else you think might be useful. So where can you find it? The project home is on GitHub. Pushed it this morning. You can go check it out. Additionally, I plan on posting like a blog post or two about some of the things I talked about today and maybe some other stuff as well. I'll tweet out links to that as they come out. And kind of to close, I have some kind of closing remarks both for defensive perspective and an offensive perspective. Really, PSAMC highlights the fact that the AMSI signatures need to catch up with the obfuscation detection. The obfuscation detection is really pretty decent, but we actually need signatures that force us to use more obfuscation. So right now we don't even need to use all that much. Defenders, feel free to use PSAMC to audit your AMSI signatures. Are you catching what you expect to catch? You might be surprised. And really, as defenders, we need to shift to thinking about detection over prevention. The AMSI is a huge step in the right direction for prevention, but the AMSI is designed to catch known bad, not all bad. And it does that fairly well. But we shouldn't think of it as a way to block all known bad, or all bad, I mean. Really what we need to be doing is collecting, centralizing, and monitoring our command line logs, script block logs, all the logs. And additionally, you can implement things like obfuscation detection to analyze those logs. From an offensive perspective, absolutely things are moving towards other languages besides PowerShell. PowerShell, especially in version 5, the security's increased quite a bit. Things are going to move towards other languages that have less protections. But in the meantime, we have a ton of PowerShell scripts already made. And so it's a little bit lazy, but we already have some of that stuff available and we should be using it. Take advantage of your AMSI and script block logging bypass if it still works. Use obfuscation, minimize your obfuscation. Use PSAMC to help you do that. And then finally, an idea kind of to use PSAMC for that I kind of plan on doing privately is kind of maintaining like a known library of minimized obfuscation per anti-malware provider. So like the first time I see a new anti-malware provider, I can use PSAMC to get all of my minimally obfuscated scripts for that provider, and then the next time I run into it, I can just immediately pull from that library and start running things knowing that I won't be detected. unless there's some sort of update on the signatures. So I want to take a second and just acknowledge a few people, specifically people whose code I use in PSAMC. It uses Invoke Obfuscation, developed by Daniel Bohannon, and he's kind of the initial person who kind of explained what the AMSI is to me, so you can blame him for all of this stuff. And PS Reflect, written by Macgraver, another really cool tool that you should check out. And additionally, I mentioned some tools or showed them in demos. Just want to give credit to the people that wrote them. So Revo Obfuscation, developed by Daniel and Lee. I showed a demo of CrackMap Exec, written by Bytebleeder, and thanks to all the Empire developers as well. And so that wraps up the presentation. I'll take any questions if you guys have them. I think we have a few minutes left. Shoot.
What AMC anti-malware engines have you run into? You have Windows Defender for all your stuff.
Yeah, so I've seen several kind of like on engagements. I haven't had the chance to run PSAMC against really any of them besides Defender yet. That's something I really want to do, but haven't gotten the chance to yet. If there's any AV people out there who want to let me run a test copy, I would be happy to audit your signatures. Go ahead.
Is there any reason, assuming that your test environment is the same version of Windows 10 and Windows Defender as the production environment you're testing against, is there any reason to do it in the production environment? Is there any differences in AMC that would be interesting to look?
If AMSI is on and it's the same anti-malware provider with the same signature updates, then it should be the same, I think. Yeah. Just got to make sure the signatures haven't changed.